Hi, everyone. My name is Marcus Heyman. I'm co-chair of this year's BPC, an MPA student here at the Kennedy School, and also a joint MBA at MIT Sloan. So thank you all for coming. The theme of this year's BPC, as you know, is Black in brackets, Obama's America, reimagining opportunity in a post-racial era. And so what we're trying to do this year is reflect on the changing state of Black communities in 2014 and the extent to which our nation has progressed or regressed towards the ideals of equality and justice for all. So in our team discussions about criminal justice and mental health and education, foreign affairs, we realized that one central issue was missing, and it was the issue of Black identity, and Black identity as an evolving concept. And so we wanted to infuse that conversation into our conference. So, as I think about my own identity, I'm African American, born and raised in Boston. My co-chair, Marissa, is Afro-Caribbean, grew up in Kingston, Jamaica. Our president is a son of a white American mother and Kenyan father. So none of us are any more or less Black than the other, but clearly our experience is very different, and that makes our identities different. And so this doesn't mean that people of diverse backgrounds can't work together to tackle complex challenges, but it does mean that all of our communities across the Black diaspora need to be creative about building partnerships to support each other and really unpack and understand those various identities. So we know that there's common interest, and sometimes it seems as though African Americans and Black immigrant communities struggle to find that common interest. So that's why we're here today to discuss, and why I'm proud that we can have this conversation. So I'm very much looking forward to our esteemed panel, and with that, I will turn it over to Iffy.
Good afternoon, everyone. You can hear me, right? Okay. This is a really exciting panel. This will be very, very informal. We definitely want to hear from everyone that's here, everyone who's willing to talk, ask questions. Before I introduce our panelists, what's great about this panel, being that it's also gender balanced, is that it really does represent an array of different identities. Myself, I was born in Trenton. I'm first generation. My family's from Nigeria. We have the Caribbeans represented here. Donald is from Antigua. Mena is from Ethiopia. And so that represents East Africa, which is different than West Africa. And Errol represents the good old country of Detroit. And so, when we discuss this, even in the creation of this panel, I definitely want to thank the co-directors for having the foresight to make sure that the panelists also could answer these questions in a non-monolithic but all to be respected manner. All of the panelists will be doing a lot more talking than me, though, because they're all doctors and experts in the field. But at the same time, we do not intend to speak for everyone or the whole community. So we are sure that during the question and answer session that you all will also be able to enlighten us as to what your experiences are as being Black and brown in America. This is also a very timely issue. There was a recent article here in the Boston Globe, I don't know if people saw it, it came out like March 25th, talking about the increased presence of specifically Black immigrants here in Massachusetts, and how within your own backyard there's definitely from both a policy level and a social level a need for more connectivity. I believe the number that they raised was 76,000 just here in Massachusetts alone. That's Black immigrants. So you talk about that, and you compound that with the overall large Black community. I mean, I would say that's pretty large political power, but I'm not gonna, vote 2014. That's all I'm gonna say. So with that said, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Dr. Mena Demisi, who's not only amazing doctor, one of my close friends. She is a doctor receiving her PhD in political science and public policy from the University of Michigan. And she really I really don't think we'll know how great this is, but she conducted the first and only study that focused on African congressional caucuses here in the United States House of Representatives. She has also worked on the Hill, having served with Barbara Lee from California during the 112th Congress. She currently serves as the Senior Policy Analyst for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Both Mena and I recently we're in a trip in Benin this past November, where we were part of a young women's empowerment session, which really wasn't just about women, it was youth in general in Benin. So even through that trip alone, that shows some connectivity between us here as Americans and our brothers and sisters in Africa. She also is an advisory member of the Diaspora African Women's Network. So if anyone has questions about Dawn and what they do, please approach her. Dr. Errol Henderson, who is to her immediate right, is Associate Professor of Political Science at Penn State University. But I think he missed his calling as being Dave Chappelle's sidekick. This man's funny. So I just want to prepare everyone right now for what's about to happen to our lives. He on a serious note, he is an author of over 30 scholarly publications. He's currently working on 2 books right now. He literally is carrying it with him. He showed it to me, so he's serious, even though he claims he's only good at creating titles, but I don't believe him. He has served as the director of the Peace Program for a community-based organization called Save Our Sons and Daughters, which consisted of the families and friends of children killed in Detroit. So in a lot of ways, he has a lot of institutional knowledge about things that have already been done. A lot of times we try to recreate things, but things that could be done within our urban communities. He himself is from the Brewster Projects in Detroit. So I think that's also important while we're here in a very scholarly institution to really talk about the different experiences that many of our working poor and low-income communities are experiencing here in America. To my immediate right, we have Donald Anthonyson, born in Antigua, and he has been involved in both civil societies, coalition building, community building initiatives for some time, both here in the United States, in Antigua, and the Caribbean as a whole. He is a member and past president of Environmental Awareness Group, which is the largest environmental group in the Eastern Caribbean. And he's also involved in organizing of the Antiguan diaspora in New York. He is the organizer. He is an organizer at Families for Freedom, which is a New York-based human rights organization by and for immigrants facing and fighting deportation. So I also think that that's something that we should definitely touch on. In general, a lot of the times when we talk about immigration and even deportation, the issues that affect Black communities is missing, it's silent. So hopefully Donald will incite us on that. He currently lives in Harlem, which I guess is okay. I live in Brooklyn, but you know.
Bringing it back.
Bringing it back? So with that said, I want to give each one of our panelists about 2 minutes to kind of just discuss this, really large concept of Black identity and what that means to them, the work that they've done, and how we should, how their definition of Black identity informs the work that they do. And I'll start with you, Donald.
Well, yeah, thank you. Definitely glad to be here because there's a lot of irony in me being here. But in regards to what we do, I'm also a steering committee member of the Black Immigration Network. This came about because you hear a lot about immigration. The first thing you see, it looks like a Latino issue. Black immigrants, like Boston, you have 76,000 in terms of numbers. We are growing, is a very large growing population actually. We do face a whole bunch of issues. One for me is in particular, deportation. It's not so much coming in, it's we are being kicked out. It's also about inclusion. Most immigrants, regardless if you're African or Afro-immigrant, there is already a built-in anti-Black, a racism that's, you don't even reach the country yet, and the first thing is, you don't mix with African Americans. So there was a need to basically bridge that because for immigrants, we're facing exile basically when we cross the rules of immigration. So we found that we have to definitely link with our African American kinship, because that's where we say we have color and we have kin. So that drives a lot of the work that we do. In the network, in particular though, the work that I do on the ground is basically trying to help people, regardless of color, not get removed from the country. And that comes to the point that affects a whole bunch of African American. Most of us end up with a criminal conviction, regardless what the situation is. As a non-US citizen, that makes you deportable, especially after the laws. So, my 2 minutes up here?
Almost, you know.
Okay, so basically, the reason why we're here now in regards to immigration, deportation, the high numbers, you probably have heard we call the president the deporter in chief. So in the last couple of years, I think today or tomorrow is going to make 2 million people getting deported. A good number of that is Afro immigrants, whether or not Afro-Latino, Afro-Caribbean, or Afro from the continent itself. So a whole bunch of us do get deported. But the numbers matter because it's breaking up our families, and we basically try our best to link and try to defend our people, and hopefully the people who write the policies can actually make it possible to give us the tools or the weapons to defend ourselves against what's coming against us. Because it is a policy from 1996 that have created the moment right now. So.
Thank you to the steering committee and for being here. I'm honored to be on the panel. I think this is a very important discussion to have, so I'll just dive right in. I think that the issues we're talking about are not new to us, right? It's sort of, we all know Black identity is not a monolithic, a concept, although, as Donald pointed out in our previous conversation, it is the one, sort of our unifying characteristic is that we have been consistently judged by the fact that we're all Black. So when you think about Black identity, for me, number one, I think it's important to put out on the table that the fundamental struggle that Black people have had in a global sort of world to assert their identity beyond race is fundamentally connected to slavery in the US and colonialism on the continent. And so when we talk about living in a post-racial era, it bothers me because we haven't yet engaged the question of what it looks like to live in a post-slavery era or a post-colonial era. And so it's easy to jump to the fact that we have a Black president and look at the symbolic achievements we made, which are very important. But again, to sort of say it's an either-or thing, that we've either achieved and we're going to focus on the successes, or we're not doing a good job and therefore we have to focus on the challenges. They have to happen simultaneously. That's the only real way, in my opinion, that we would make progress. Two, I think it's important to put out on the table that if you're sort of the lens, the framing of the issues that we have as Black, racially and ethnic communities across the globe really comes down to one word, one topic, and it has to do with citizenship. I think that's the common thread of all. It is a fight to be seen as an individual with the rights and benefits. In the case of the US, what do we go to? The 14th Amendment. It was a Civil War amendment ratified in 1868, but 20 years later you look at the continent and you see European powers divvying up Africa at the same time that we're trying to say, in the US, that we're going to start to treat Black people a little better, right? And so it's one thing to have legislation codified, it's another thing to have it implemented and followed, but you have to look outside of the challenges that we face in the US and recognize that they're all connected. The same issue that we're dealing with here with voter suppression, especially in the last election, that's a rebirth of the Southern strategy in a very sophisticated, covert way. So if you're talking about, what a perfect union looks like, you also have to talk about the progress, but the things that we haven't captured yet have been subverted. There's covert racism. These are not new concepts. So you don't say, oh, it disappears because you can't see it. That's the struggle we have. So sophisticated struggles. It's not just about, at least back in the day we knew who our enemies were because they said it loud and clear. Now we don't know. But you see what's going on subversively. States are now trying to transition to get propositions passed to stop collecting data that identifies our communities beyond race and ethnicity. And for the public health folks, I'm not a public health expert, but they make a very strong case about disproportionate rates of disease and contraction in African immigrant communities, for instance. But we're not going to be able to know that. And you look to the census, and I'll stop there. They had 10 years to get it right in 2010. And if you've taken a look at it, and some of us have filled it out, we still lack the option to identify our self-bound race. This is one of many issues that we can come together on, because it's not just about voting. It's the question of what we're voting for, but then there are a host of other issues that that we need to discuss and engage in a serious way, because if we don't have the data, that to me is sort of identify some of the new sort of racism, you would say, of today, is that if we don't know where our communities are and what their challenges are. I mean, for me, my personal research is invested in the participation and representation of African immigrants in the American polity. That's why I did the study I did, because after 2000, you see the CBC as the first racial minority caucus. Well, I mean, you should look at the number of caucuses that exist to represent number of race and ethnic groups. They're modeling themselves off of a racial minority caucus called the Congressional Black Caucus, but the ones that have been emerging lately, politicians are getting savvy in their characteristics to reach out to their constituencies. So, if you with the Crimea and you look at the Ukrainian caucus, you go to those members and they're the sort of symbolic representation of the interest there. Well, there are African congressional caucuses that CBC members have been quite active on, but these invisible communities are around, and folks on the Hill are tapping into them, but we haven't used them as a vehicle to actually hold them accountable. So I think we can have a sort of larger discussion about Black identity, but I'm more interested in the question of, regardless of how you identify your identity, how are you using that to gain political power for your community, not just you. So how are you using Black identity as a tool for empowerment? I don't care if how you identify yourself. It's how you use that to what end.
I appreciate Brother Marcus, Sister Marissa, the conveners of the conference, Sister Ife for the wonderful introduction, as well as my co-panelists, especially Brother Don and Sister Minna. And I was really appreciating what both co-panelists said, and bringing these issues back to power. And identity issues that don't represent power really usually don't get on the agenda of identity issues, because it goes back to power. And for me, these issues of identity have to do with the unresolved issues of social justice in this country that revolve around culture for Black peoples, or those defined as Black people, and white supremacism. And something that strikes me when I have some of the conferences, and when we talk about policy, but I think about policy broadly defined, from the formal structures of policy vis-a-vis governments, all the way down to the community level and grassroots policy. So it's at the grassroots level where Black folks in this country have struggled to create this Pan-African identity. That's who we are. We are immigrants as well, those who are sons and daughters of those who were enslaved here. But the issue for me becomes this Pan-African identity was fashioned. It was fashioned against white supremacism, which is a power relationship. So when I hear brothers and sisters talking like this, is how are we redefining culture, or defining ourselves culturally in ways that are actually liberating? But what happens is that often comes face to face with unresolved issues of social justice. And the biggest unresolved issues of social justice in this country is the land question once Black folks had achieved their liberation in the Civil War. That unresolved issue, William Darity, the famous Black economist at Duke, he traced the inequalities all the way down to Black and white net worth, goes back to inheritances and in vivo transfers of wealth. That explains the disparity between Black and white. This goes back to the unresolved land question in the US Civil War, which was a Black revolution. That's what Du Bois taught us in 1935. If you don't like Du Bois, two white Pulitzer Prize winning professors. Let's see, it was McPherson argues this, and so does, I'm blocking on his name, Kahn's the other. So, but Du Bois argued in 1935, right? This was a slave revolution. See? But this land question hasn't been resolved. We know what's liberating about the land question. You can resolve much of the problems in Latin America if you just had the redistribution of land. See? But these come up against what you can, this sort of radical pragmatism. It's not radical. It's pragmatism with a radical pose. What? You ain't said nothing. All you're talking about is another way to appeal to white supremacists who are going to have you fighting for crumbs in the first place, have us fighting for crumbs. See? So how do we redefine the ways that are truly liberating? Because there was a time when many of us couldn't imagine ourselves free. Some people did. See, Charles DeLon did. Denmark Vesey did. Gabriel Prosser did. Nat Turner did. John Brown did. And a whole lot of people in between. William Webb and Harriet Tubman. This is policy. See? They created a policy and a structure to articulate that policy, and they talked about the interests of black people. Not simply saying, you know what, we could do that railroad thing y'all talking about, but shoo, I don't know how many we gonna get to go along with that. I don't think it can be done. How you gonna say we gonna be free? We ain't never been free in Alabama and Mississippi. What are you talking about? They organized the revolution. It didn't come from the benefaction of white people. That's a myth that was created after the fact. Read David Blight. Even the struggle for our liberation is often defined by the gift of some patrons, whites, who saw it within their heart to see us as equal human beings. Back in the day, we used to say, that's very white of you. We don't say that now. It's on camera. See, don't say that now. Yeah, some of us do. Look here. So this issue of identity needs to be one, I would argue, where descendants of enslaved Africans resolve this here as well before we try to impose a structure on immigrant communities who suffered under the same type of conditions that we often are. See? So this is where I come from, the issues of power and policy. And this is how I see policy in this broad view. It's the only way we got on the policy agenda. We broadened it, redefined it, and structured it in a way, if you can't appreciate, understand our humanity, then I don't have to appeal to you, and I won't appeal to you. It's a violation of my own understanding of my humanity. 2 minutes.
So
2 minutes.
you still have 30 seconds left. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But I do think that one of the key things that all of you had discussed also has a lot to do with understanding both history and just understanding, educating ourselves about certain things that we all may take for granted because it's either we studied it or we live it. And I just wanted to ask, all of you all, how are we as a community going to discuss and educate ourselves about both the experience that's here and then the experience of those who are coming here? And the only reason why I asked that is while you were speaking and just rattling off all of these names of liberators here, the sad reality is there are a lot of people here that don't know that history. And then the deeper issue is that there are a lot of people, including my parents' generation, that came here and may have not bothered to learn that. So before we start talking about uniting, what do we need to do to, and even before we start talking about fighting together for what? Like what are we doing to unify our histories so that we recognize the connection between them, but also recognize the different struggles and respect the different struggles so that we can then know how to move forward?
Well, are we going in the same sequence?
Anyone can start off.
Well, when I started out saying that it's ironic that I'm here is that the history of Harvard, especially Harvard Law School, is tied to my country because it was started from the benefits of a plantation in my country. It started here. It started in my country. So maybe I'm reaping some of the benefits of some ancestor or something like that. But the reality is, even today, the name of the person who gave the land and gave the money to that law school to start still exists in my country. So we keep that knowledge. We talk about history, we keep that knowledge. So when we bring it here, we say, we're connected. There's a lot of things individually from my country that connects to the struggle of African Americans. During the time of UNIA, there was a church, the African Orthodox Church, not necessarily only in the Garvey side, but the church that carried the UNIA was started by Antiguan. But it spread out within America, South America, and also South Africa, and all over the African diaspora. So we make the connections that we are one and the same all the time. We keep bringing it back that there's no division When we say we have color and kin, it means a lot more than just the color and maybe we are cousins or something like that. The kinship goes through the struggle, the tears, the blood and stuff like that. And when Brother El was talking about that's mighty white of you and going back to the land issue, we just lost Chokwe Lumumba.
That's right.
Free the land. The 40 acres of mule. No, I'm coming from a different place, but land is mad important. It's what we stand on, is what we actually gain things from. And again, going back to the whole thing about policy, it makes it easier when people start to use that history to develop the policy. So we know where people stand here. This is how we got there. This is how they got there. So when we come in, we don't disrespect it because the tension between kin is great. You know, it has to be. In my community, when I came here first, I was told, I play basketball. I used to play basketball. I don't even walk too good now, but when I got on the court, people were saying, shit, man, you're supposed to be playing soccer. Go back on the banana boat. This is people that look just like me, talking somewhat like me, not even understanding the bond that we have, the kinship we had. I resisted, they resisted. So we have this thing going along where we're fighting each other, chopping against each other, instead of learning the skills. I was explaining to Mena that there's a saying, the countenance of one sharpeneth the other. So if two knives are going against each other, we get sharp. You know, if we're rubbing against each other, we're learning. But if we keep chopping against each other, the blades get dull and blunted. You don't want to see a wound from a broken blade. It leaves an ugly scar. That scar, the person who gets the scar, keep looking back on it, keep going back to that hatred, to that anger. So we have to learn all those things, learn to work with one another to achieve that whole bottom line and start with a great policy. I keep coming back to the policy because it's a policy that, overall policy, because I got a problem coming to places like this. I'm on the ground, so when I hear Harvard, Columbia, and stuff like that, these are the places that create the policies that affect us. Where I live in Harlem, where I come from in Antigua, where I originally come from in Africa. These are the places that produce those policies. And you guys are the ones who are coming up with the policies. So for me, it's for y'all to understand that. Because on the ground, we don't care about Harvard. We care about how we survive. And then we see somebody coming from, and it's not a disrespect. I'm sorry, but it's just that in reality, if you guys are going to make policy that affect us, make it stand. The last thing I want to say about, Mena spoke about citizenship. It's the driving point for all immigrants to come here. It's, oh, woof, woof, go get your citizenship, you become an American. What does that actually mean when the people who sweat, died, worked, fought, it does, African Americans are considered second-class citizens regardless, whatever. Last year we were out there fighting for comprehensive immigration reform. And while people were up on the hill, across the street in the Supreme Court, they're taking away the right of African Americans to vote. Yet they're still telling us, policymakers are saying, we're going to pass an immigration bill, and after maybe 13 or 14 years, you can become a citizen. Who's to say after 13 or 14 years, because the way we get citizenship means that we can't vote either? It's another way for them to blunt us. And, you know, it's just to keep that in mind as we go along.
Yeah, the citizenship piece is very key because, and part of, again, it's easy to deconstruct, right? We're all in the project of deconstruction. It's a lot harder to actually propose solutions. So while I have great respect for members of Congress and who many of them consider themselves activists as well for the Black community, we still have to engage this question and find out where our allies are and and who our enemies are. And to be quite frank, you know, I was naive when I first came to studying politics, especially with, my parents are from Ethiopia. I was born in Cleveland, the city that LeBron decided to leave back in the day, but that's another discussion. So the point is though, you know, I came with the knowledge of sort of understanding how my parents' opportunity to come to this country is directly related. We all thrive on the backs of our African American ancestors, and you know, this whole myth of sort of it's either going to be a Black immigrant that gets a job or an African American, that is troubling because, again, it's a repercussion of living in a society that's still plagued with racism. By what? By pitting communities within the same racial group or ethnic group against one another. It's part of the plan. And so we need to understand that, quite frankly, my naivete in thinking that anybody who was black was my ally is not the reality, because we're not all invested in the project of black empowerment. And in fact, we have to be real about living in a capitalist society and what that means for our individualistic notion of community. Let me get mine first, and then I'll think about the community. Or what can I do for the community if I haven't made myself successful? Really? When you look at our history, you think that all our ancestors had anything? They had each other, and they used that. There was no question to have a choice. So, now we have the choice, our generation, so we can choose to be part of the plan, the sort of plan of devastation and dividing our communities, or you can be part of the plan of action through, solidarity. If they're going to identify us as black, we use that as a mobilizing tool for our community, not as a way to divide each other. The other point I would make is that back to this, you all heard the story about the Ghanaian American young man who got accepted to Harvard and all these choices. The media, I think it was the USA Today article that said that, well, he's different because he has African background. That's not true. The thing is, I try to be open-minded about everything. It's easy to come to this country from Africa. Why do Africans have among the highest foreign-born educated population? It's not just because, information comes easy to them. We decide, Congress decides who we want to bring to this country. Do you think we have uneducated and poor folks? Sure, we leave them back in Africa. So when the African immigrants come here and start talking about, well, African Americans should pick themselves off the ground, why is it so hard for, because look at the immigration bill. There's a reason for the transition to a merit-based a system and getting rid of the DV category. DV category is the most profitable and beneficial for African immigrants, and it's the one thing that they're trying to take away. In fact, I think one of the more recent write-ups in the House bill, which hopefully will come up this June, has, in addition to trying to get rid of the DV category, has a quota, I think under 100,000, to cover the number, this is supposed to replace the DV category, to cover the number of people from the entire continent of Africa and the Caribbean. It's abysmally low. And so, the whole idea of pitting us against each other, you have to also know, this goes for our folks, brothers and sisters back home, but also here. Why is it that African immigrants do better here in some cases than others? And you have to also critique the policies. Some of the policies that are targeted for specific communities don't end up getting to them. And part of that goes back to the data piece. If you don't have an option to identify yourself as someone who's first or second generation African, and therefore maybe your parents worked at the IMF or World Bank, and actually you're doing quite well, but you're getting in on the affirmative action piece, where you look at an African American who's generation after generation in an urban poverty-stricken area in a school system that doesn't even offer the basic classes you need to get into college. You have to question that. So there are ways to work around this, like critiquing the immigration reform bill, for instance, and understanding that, yeah, there's a real conversation to be had if we're going to, transition to a merit-based system that might actually help, if you look at Black immigrants, we're mostly in the service sector industry, although the educational attainment is much higher than that. There's a mismatch. So, if you're going to target, if we're going to target African immigrants to sort of fill in those STEM jobs, and when you look at African Americans who have high rates of majoring in these issues, there is bound to be some tension there. But we also have to understand why, for instance, things like the DV category are important, because they allow for more options to contribute to society, and quite frankly, a lot of Black immigrants contribute to our nation's economy in low skill and high skill areas in the service sector. But so there are ways to talk about these things, and I just want to keep us reminded of the fact that and it was said yesterday, racism is still alive and well. And what does it mean? How does that manifest itself? And part of it is learning and educating, knowing your history, knowing the details of the policies, and then doing something about it, mobilizing around it, instead of working in silos. And the same, we could have a whole another conversation about democratization on the continent, and the realization by the inability for even young folks who are trying to come to America with President Obama's YALI initiative to learn how to be active and go back and change their communities back in Africa. But the key is that democratization works very different on the continent than it does here. But there's a need for us to collaborate across issues, across land, and across identity, and use that as a tool for positive change as opposed to division.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. Piggybacking the last point, Sister Minna. You look at the democratization wave that began around the 1990s. This begins in Africa. This democratization wave is going to see the eventually overthrow of folks like Mobutu. But it starts in Benin. But even as we look at our cultural symbols or the historical processes, you would know somebody like Lech Walesa, who's stood up against communists in Poland. But at that same year, Nigerian trade union workers had organized against their dictatorship. You don't know their names. And this is at Harvard, right? I'm not taking a survey because everybody raised their hand and said, we know all about that, wrote a paper on it. So I got to remember why I'm at Harvard here. Y'all might all know this stuff. But by and large, it's not as known. So the symbols aren't there. So we have symbols that suggest there's friction among different immigrant communities and communities of indigenous folks and also communities of folks who were earlier immigrants. Yeah, that's true. But you tell me, compared to what? The German Americans, Italian Americans, Jewish Americans, Irish Americans, English Americans. Are you serious? You know the history of the friction between these groups in this country? So again, compared to what? So sometimes we'll accept this sort of black exceptionalism that we're at each other's throat. Are you for real? Some of these things can be demystified, and it's so important that we demystify white supremacism. White supremacism shows up and manifests itself over and over again and keeps pretending like it's not here. I don't even use phrases like a post-civil. That's ridiculous. It's ahistorical. We have never argued to get a black face in a space. Even King argued against that. Read is remaining awake through a glorious revolution. He's not even asking you to participate, just remaining awake through a glorious revolution. He said in his last Sunday sermon before he was assassinated, right? He said it's an unhappy truth that racism is a way of life for the vast majority of white Americans, spoken or unspoken. He said, well, it's just a marginal aspect, a way of life. For a couple of them in some southern backwater, the vast majority of white Americans. Where did King say he found the most racist white folk? Chicago. Did they all go get Jesus? What happened to them? They stopped having to him? They just stopped being racist, right? They didn't raise generations of racists. So I want you to see, I don't use these words loosely. See, it has a particular history to it. And I want you to appreciate that, not for the slogans. But nevertheless, when you talk about democratization and what democracy is, manifest on the continent, when you talk about the foreign policy interests of the United States, they should dovetail, I think they can dovetail with the type of push we have among African Americans, among black folks in this country, just as we did with respect to South Africa, but also with respect to issues like the war in the DRC. You know, one of the biggest issues on college campuses is a war in Sudan. You should read Mamdani about Darfur. But I know you've had him up here. But then about 6 million are being killed in the DRC. You don't see that in high school classrooms. Why? Because Kabila is allied with the U.S. and with Kagame. See? So, and Museveni. So we need to, I think we have some convergent interests between the descendants of enslaved Africans and African immigrants across almost every country that they immigrate from. And we should speak to those interests. And that's why I like what it said, not impose the monolith, but to appreciate that we have set a moral, political, and economic and social standard for our Pan-Africanism. I challenge you to talk about, we the only people in the world walk around each other calling, just on general principle, just saying, calling each other brother and sister. And we act like white supremacists or their apologists are our moral teachers. You can't teach me anything. Your hands are too bloody, or you make too many rationalizations. We have our own examples if we'd only draw for them. Is it fair to say that for most of us, we wouldn't be here except for what our ancestors and others had sacrificed for us? So it doesn't stand no reason then that maybe they got something right. Maybe we can even bother to, let's go out on a limb here, remember it, apply it, talk about it. So when you have Obama go to Morehouse and say that he used the word racism less than any president since Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter was running away from that like he did when he was a peanut farmer. But look here, in Georgia, but look here, Obama, he goes to Morehouse and says, look at him, I ain't mad at Obama, I voted for him again. Well, not again. But the first, he said that President Morehouse got to work twice as hard. Why do they have to work twice as hard? Because of white racism.
Right.
Don't make me look like the mad. He angry. Dave Chappelle, he mad. Why he so mad?
Why you mad?
You know what it is. So why don't you make that plain? And then an apologist come up and start to say why you can't do that. And I harken back to the people who made the sacrifices so that folks could be here. You see what I'm saying? We have an obligation to them too. We have an obligation of expanding the realm of what we call policy. That's where I'm coming from. I ain't mad though. Y'all okay?
And before we open it up to Q&A, two questions that I wanted to ask panelists. All of you don't have to answer that, but if we can just...
That means you don't want me to answer easy.
No. Yes, you can, but you... I struggled actually writing this question down because this is, Harvard is also the, prestigious, the president is an alum of this place, so...
He went here?
Well, not here, but here, Harvard Law School. But in what ways does the president, well, I'll speak from my own standpoint. Even if we talk, I mentioned it yesterday, I felt a couple stones, but I'm all right. But with even my brother's keeper, right? So the issue that I had with that was not the initiative. As people who know my background knows, I've been dedicated to Black men and boys. I've been questioned about why I've been dedicated so much to Black men and boys. But the issue that I had with the delivery that the president had was while he made this announcement during very close to the anniversary of the Dred Scott decision, where we weren't even considered a full human, and now the highest platform in the land is at least acknowledging, that we're here. I was troubled by the absence of him discussing what you were just talking about now, the institutional, racism that in spite of whether you have the highest degree in the land or despite of whether you have the highest position in the world, you're still going to face certain things just because of the color of your skin, which I think is sometimes, because it's so missing from the conversation, it makes it seem like we can mentor our way out of this issue. Right. So I want to get the opinion from some of you, one of you, as to whether or not the having a Black president, if it has more helped or hurt the conversation of Black identity, even with his own, identity as being African American but not African American. And I don't know if any of you.
I'll just say this. There's for political scientists, this is probably the most exciting time and perhaps, challenging in some ways to dissect what it means to have a Black president. I think, there should be a larger discussion about what it means to have a two-party system in which one has full knowledge of the significance of having a guaranteed Black vote. And what that means for the future of mobilization within the American polity institutionally. At the end of the day, though, you have to ask yourself, what are you doing about it, right? And so if you look at, all these conversations about the president, meanwhile, I'm thinking midterms are coming up. Do we have a Black national strategy for midterm elections? Because we need to.
I'll tell you
what would the world look like if, regardless of what race or background the president comes, if the Congress was majority one way or the other, that would benefit sort of Black people, right? That you have enormous change. And let's go to the state and local level. And that is where the power is in many ways. We can talk about the president, and we should, but he's only one man and he won't be around much longer. But the real question is lasting institutional change and how we're fighting the systemic barriers that exist regardless of who's in office. There's a lot of, at the federal level, right? So if you look at, for instance, can you imagine all this talk about the criminal justice system and, a lot of this has to do with the power of governors. And the power of Republican governors in some cases who launch the voter suppression initiative, who make sure that the states have punitive measures for, criminal justice, punitive measures basically for those who come through the criminal justice system, African American men and women. Okay, and so imagine a world in which we galvanized at a state and local level and a midterm election level in November. the mapping of the state of the country would be completely different. And I think that we need to engage in the question more and have simultaneous conversations about President Obama at a federal level, but really what's going to happen to is there ever going to be a third party, a viable strategy for a third party? We live in a multi-party system, even though we only talk about Republicans and Democrats, and certainly they're doing a lot in their own right, but the question really comes to what are we doing about it? And so there are a host of issues you can talk about, but notice the similarities between, Black immigrants and African Americans. Both have double-digit unemployment, although, the conversation is about us taking something for another. The same citizenship rights that we are in trying to reverse the Supreme Court decision regarding the Voting Rights Act. These are fundamental questions about citizenship. What's going on in Haiti and DR? Those are questions about citizenship. You have children of Haitian descent born in the DR that are told that they have no full rights and benefits. What are we doing here about that? We're tied. We're fundamentally tied to those issues. So, this question of citizenship again comes back to mobilization. It comes back to the privileged using their power, and we're talking about Black people now, to help those that don't have it, and really recognizing, where we are. There are language barriers that affect, the knowledge, access barriers for Black immigrants to even know what their rights are. And I'm talking about folks that are legally here as legal permanent residents or even naturalized citizens, but still don't know where to get that information. That's the same issue that African Americans who are in poverty have. So we got to talk about these issues and find out how we may be struggling from the same thing in different ways. I would just say to, keep your eye on the president, of course, but again, look down the spectrum at the very state and local level, and what does it mean for us to engage at that level, where I believe we can make, significant change lasting after 4 or 8 years.
And you got, did you want to?
Yeah, I want to say something real quick. I just think of what will happen in your, I enjoy being here at Harvard. I'm glad y'all invited me. I don't want to sound like I'm mad at you. But hey, what would happen if in your policy class you all wrote on reparations? You know what I'm saying? If you talk about changing the agenda and what you can do right here in your here, or you bring up the people who have effectuated policy that did bring groups together. My father was Jamaican. He doesn't fit the Jamaican stereotype because when I was born, we were in a housing project, and he decided to stay there for until I was an adult. It really wasn't his choice, y'all. But he doesn't fit the Jamaican immigrant stereotype. He married my mother from Alabama. See? Now, but you have people in these communities that organize across ethnic differences. I'm talking about Black folks, across ethnic differences, right? And people who did because their interests converged. What was the huge convergent interest? The murder of children in Detroit. Clementine Barfield started Save Our Sons and Daughters when her 17-year-old son was murdered. She said, my 17-year-old son was a victim, and so was the teenager who killed him. Is that something? But she's doing what Brenda Muhammad did in Atlanta, Mothers of Murdered Sons, what Sisters in Mother's Rock did in LA, what Sister Davis did in New York. This urban peace and justice movement effectuated, this started in the 80s, effectuated the orientation of hip hop at the time. Most of it was the work of Black women, and it was as significant as it is forgotten. See? But if what you can do now is these same people, invite them up here, have Harvard pay them, so they can keep doing the kind of work they're doing, but also inform you about policies that are meaningful policies, grassroots policies. You got them right here in Boston and from Roxbury. Sister just telling me about this one sister I didn't know. We used to work with Gang Peace out here. But you have these right here, and it's beautiful that you can name them, bring them up here and pay them. Then bring the students that they work with up here and pay them. You don't have to mystify what's going on, or how do we make this connection, or I gotta wait for my perfection to come before I can help anybody. What nonsense, right? So you can make these links right here, see, and you're doing it now, so I don't mean to say that you're not, okay? But to develop these things, because I think, to your question, Obama became a better Democrat than he was a Black president. And that was a choice that I think a lot of Black folks agreed with and a lot of Black folks disagreed with, right? See, but I think we can demystify race, and that's why I keep talking about it's white racism, baby. You're not gonna get me to stop calling it that, because we need to appreciate and give that historical continuity so folks can understand and demystify. And you can get somebody from a housing project like myself to understand that. We can pronounce Ecclesiastes, we can work with it, we'll struggle with it, but we'll get it.
So we invite people, I have one more question for all the panelists, but I believe that's the microphone back there for the microphones at either end. So if you want to start, I guess, quietly just getting up to the mic so that we can get right into Q&A. The question that I want to ask you all is, first of all, you all have already raised some practical, and for those who have pencil and paper or want to use their phone, you know, why I'm really happy about this conference is that we're not only just talking about these things in theory, right, but we also want to talk about practical, what can we do tomorrow steps. You know, ideas from, you know, really holding our, especially our Black members of Congress accountable for, you know, the positions that they're in, but also members that I would even argue those who serve large immigration communities regardless of their race, you know, holding them accountable. You had mentioned papers that, or publications that focus on issues that affect all of us that have still been unattended to, whether it's bringing to light those lost past battles that we have won, and those that we probably still need to raise. What other practical solutions? I think a lot of times we go to these conferences, people have solutions, and they're not even part of the solutions, right? They just mention it, and it'd be like, it'd be real nice if somebody would do this, you know? But what practical solutions and also challenges do we face when we start talking about mobilizing within our communities, when we start talking about ways to inform and support, you know, spaces where those who identify themselves as Black can come together and address everything from literacy and illiteracy, whether you're from, you know, a project in Bed-Stuy, or whether it's because you are from, you know, Barbados, you know, whatever it is. How do we start creating those spaces in a practical way where we all can leave here and say, you know, I've at least been told a way that I can do this, and now it's a choice, right, as to whether we do it or not. So what ways can we, you know, and many of you all have already started doing this, so what is it that we can do?
I'll speak because keep it short. One, how you create this space is by not recreating it. But going to the models and examples that Dr. Henderson was mentioning and using that as a way. People are already invested in the work of criminal justice reform, like yourself. People are already invested in the work of giving STEM opportunities to African Americans that are in urban and poor areas. They're already doing that. They have more expertise. They've devoted their life. I know there are public health folks here who are doing the same thing in terms of mental health issues. That is very significant with regard to the foreign-born population in this country. I mean, there are people, so we need to, instead of recreating the world, I mean, I'm a Midwesterner, right? So I come to DC, I go to these meetings, and I cannot tell you, everybody I meet, they've got their formal business card, and then they have this other card, where they're the new president, CEO of the new organization that's pushing this, and I'm like, dang, I only got one, you know? And, but see, I don't care about the titles, I care about how you're using that, same way I'm talking about Black identity. How are you using it? I could care less what the titles are, I care more about what you've been doing, and who have you been learning from? Who are the people that are already doing that? If we're always engaged in the project of you know, self-promotion, we're not going to get anywhere. Because frankly, we don't have 9 lives, we have 1. And I would rather learn from those who are already doing than try to, you know, start from scratch in an area I don't know anything about. So part of it is knowing what the models that exist, and the other part is just organizing. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to, you know, even get it. I mean, I'm all in favor of education, but that doesn't mean you can't serve your community beforehand. I mean, the Diaspora African Women's Network was created by my Eritrean sister who has done amazing things. She said, look, she was on the Hill for a decade or so. There's a lot of us that are trying to push immigration reform, but just get a voice for Black immigrants. And she said, you know what, I know all these people, and we're all working in silos. How about I start an organization and let us, give us a platform to know each other. I respect her as, you know, for what she's doing, and it's not just a Black thing. It's for women, and it's for any women of African descent, whether you're African American, Afro-Latino, whether you're Africa. If you care about the continent, you can join our organization. I've met so many powerful women, so now when jobs come up at the State Department, I'm gonna reserve my comment, but this Yali initiative, I mean, we need to see our faces in powerful places, okay? You can't tell me that there are not people out here invested in the work of foreign policy. Black people, there are many of them. Yes, the numbers are low, but you can't, now when you see Dawn, I'm thinking, I mean, it's over 300 people across the globe, Black women invested in African affairs. Are they tapping these people for these high-profile jobs? We're out there. And the same goes for every other sector. So don't recreate, don't reinvent the wheel if it already is spinning. It may need some fine tuning. So that's where you come in. And also work with those around you and do it and don't wait for the opportune time, because frankly, that may never come. And I mean, certainly Black in slavery, that's not what they were thinking. I mean, they had no idea whether freedom was going to be realized or not. And now we're benefiting from that. And really, stick to this idea of what does citizenship mean in a local and global context. These artificial boundaries that were created in Africa continue to be damaging the mind frames and ability of young and even old Africans to mobilize in a way that gives rise to their full citizenship. So what does democracy mean? I'm not just talking about elections. The most important part is what happens after the election, what happened before the election. That's one measure of democracy. But there are a lot of universal problems. So I'll just stay. I said I was going to be brief, but I talked a little bit longer. But I'll just stop there.
Well, I got so much things to say. I would like to say, but just jumping on what Mena is saying in terms of not to create something that's already there. A lot of time within movement, you hear about building bridges. And in the Black Immigrant Network, we don't say cross bridges, because most people think when you cross a bridge, the narrative, I'm crossing that bridge, I ain't going back. Bridges sound like you cross it, you're not going to go back to that space. Mm-hmm. But bridges are used to traverse back and forth. So go back to the places, learn from the older folks, bring it back to where you're at, because they still exist. The brother said the same thing too. The names are there. There are people in Chicago, there are people in New York who've done the work. I've done police brutality work in New York since about 1979. It's always women. So nothing is new. Cross the bridge, but not to necessarily cross, not to go back. Traverse the bridges, because we exist. The things are there, we can build on those things. If the bridge stretch all the way back to Benin or to Kivu in the DRC, the bridge is already there. Just traverse, go back and forth, find out what they're doing, how they're working there, bring it back. You take what you got, you take it back. But don't go and stay. Because isms, and when what Errol says about white supremacy and that racism, isms, going back to Bob Marley and Rastafari business, create schisms. While isms can be bridged, a schism cannot. A schism goes too deep for anybody to build any bridges. So if you're going to be building bridges and crossing bridges, that's the only way we can get over the ism. But right now we're concerned about the ism within ourselves. The bridges are not burned because we can't burn this. I know some people try their best to turn it as white as possible, but that won't happen. That bridge can never be burned. Cross it, just keep going back and forth. Learn, come back, give, share, and then we build on it. We may get innovative and stuff like that, but that bridge, don't burn it. Don't just cross it. Traverse it, learn from the other side, bring it back. We'll bring something. So.
Final word, Errol?
He said.
Going twice, third? Okay, done. All right. We'll start. We only have a couple minutes, so.
I'd like to raise the question of. No, we were just told that we're not going to be able to have questions, so I wanted to just jump right in. I'd like to hear the panel talk about the issue of Black self-hate in terms of identity, as well as how many immigrants from across the diaspora don't identify as Black.
I'm going to say real quick. I went to the first Black Immigrant Network conference. And again for time, by the time we finished discussing Black and Afro and African American, I think half the conference was wasted. I'm not too sure how to address that issue. That's an individual thing about self-hate. We had some students the other day, and that was one of the questions about the self-hate. Quickly, we use a thing that we says, most people have heard of the crabs in the barrel story. We're just basically saying, get rid of that concept. It's the barrel is the problem. It is not the crabs. Crabs are not supposed to be in a barrel in the first place. So if it looks like if they're climbing up on top of one another, you just need to get out of the barrel. It's not that we keeping people down. But if you end up stepping on somebody's neck to get ahead, that is the problem. That's the hate. If you're using to step on somebody's shoulders so that we can get to the top of the barrel and then we those go and climb over, that kind of does away with the hate in a very simplistic way. I know it's much deeper than that, but I wish we had questions, man.
I can speak to that, but I think black self-hate is the word itself. The issue is white supremacism. Now, it's just like think about sexism. I think most men are sexist, and most women believe it too. You see? I think most whites are white supremacists in this country. We got survey data for this. I think most blacks believe in white supremacism too. It's just they don't practice it. So this notion is black self-hate as opposed to what? Irish self-hate? Italian-American self-hate? You see, Jewish-American self-hate? Where you want to go? As compared to what? To make a special pathology of blackness. This is an aspect of white supremacy, and it becomes accepted. Black folks don't kill black folks kill black folks the same rate white folks kill white folks. You see what I'm saying? So there's a liberal racism and conservative racism. In a nutshell, conservative racism, black folks kill each other, well, because they're not the same kind of people as white folks. They're beneath white people. Black folks commit more crime because they're not like white people. The liberal racism, black folks commit more crime because they're poor. They're both racist precepts because black folks don't commit more crime. Black folks get arrested for more crime. See, you talk about drugs and criminalization. Drugs have been decriminalized for most white folks. You see what I'm saying? So we have to, you don't accept the instruments of white supremacism for your liberation. You don't accept the language of patriarchy for your liberation. You don't accept the language of elitism for your liberation from a class domination. So that's where I go with that. Appreciate other folks' time.
So we are out of time, and we can thank our panelists for being a part of this.
I need a time and go.
And anyone can ask questions afterwards. Feel free to come up, but not now, sorry. But if we could just really just appreciate, I don't know what different people were telling me different things, but can we just clap?
Go ahead.